Catherine Moore stood at the great window of the Galactic Council station and watched the stars. She had dreamed of this moment her entire life. Humanity had finally made it. After centuries of looking up at the night sky and wondering if they were alone, they had their answer. They were not alone, and now they had a seat at the table. The council station was enormous. It floated in neutral space, far from any homeworld, a place where hundreds of species came together to trade and talk and make peace. Catherine had studied every species she could before coming here. She knew the tall, graceful Sindari with their silver skin. She knew the small, clever Mordeth who built the finest ships in the galaxy. And she knew the Vorath. The Vorath were reptilian creatures, standing 8 feet tall with scales the color of dried blood. They had 3 seats on the council, more than any other species. They had earned those seats through war and conquest over 10,000 years. Everyone feared them. Everyone respected them. And when Catherine's shuttle had arrived at the station, a Vorath diplomat had looked at her with cold yellow eyes and laughed. "So these are the humans," he had said to his companion. "The soft little apes from the spiral arm. How amusing that they think they belong here." Catherine had said nothing. She had smiled politely and walked past them. She was a diplomat. She knew how to swallow her pride. The first few months went well enough. Humanity was given a small section of space to call their own. They were allowed to trade with a few species. They were treated like children at an adult's table, but Catherine told herself that was fine. Every species had to start somewhere. They would prove themselves in time. The colony on New Haven was humanity's pride. The planet was beautiful, with blue oceans and green forests and air so clean it made Earth's cities seem like poison. Families had moved from Earth to build new lives. Children played in streets named after places back home. Old couples sat on porches and watched sunsets that painted the sky in colors Earth had never known. Catherine visited once, 3 months before it ended. She walked through the capital city and saw hope everywhere she looked. A little girl ran up to her and gave her a flower. "Thank you for giving us the stars," the girl said. Catherine kept that flower pressed in a book. She would keep it for the rest of her life. The Vorath wanted New Haven. The planet sat on massive deposits of a mineral called varium, rare and valuable beyond measure. The Vorath had been mining varium for centuries, and their supplies were running low. They looked at this little human colony and saw weakness. They saw opportunity. Commander Daniel Harris was aboard his ship, the Starward Pioneer, when the distress call came. He had been patrolling the border, running routine scans, thinking about his daughter's birthday next week. Then his communications officer went pale and put the transmission on speaker. Screaming, explosions, a woman's voice begging for help before it cut to static. Daniel ordered his ship to maximum speed. It took them 4 hours to reach New Haven. 4 hours that felt like 4 years. When they arrived, they found nothing but fire. The Vorath had come with 200 warships. They had not bothered with ground troops. They had simply opened fire from orbit. Every city was gone. Every town was ash. 2 million people, men and women and children, burned to nothing in a single night. Daniel stood on his bridge and stared at the planet below. Smoke rose from the surface in great black columns. He had seen death before. He had fought pirates and smugglers and thought himself hardened. This was murder on a scale he could not process. His communications officer found a single survivor, a man named Peter, hiding in a mine shaft, badly burned and barely alive. They brought him aboard. His first words were a question. "Why? We never did anything to them. Why?" Daniel had no answer. The Galactic Council held an emergency session. Catherine stood before the assembled representatives of 300 species and presented the evidence. Orbital bombardment patterns, Vorath ship signatures, Communications intercepts, proving the attack was planned weeks in advance. The Vorath representative, a hulking creature named Zeltrix, did not even pretend to be ashamed. "The humans encroached on our territory," he said calmly. "We responded to protect our borders. This is our right under Council law." "They were 50 light-years inside our designated space," Catherine said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You murdered 2 million innocent people, children, families. Perhaps you should have defended them better." Zeltrix showed his teeth in something like a smile. "Perhaps you are simply too weak to hold what you claim." Catherine turned to the council. She looked at the Sindari representative, who had shared tea with her and called her friend. She looked at the Mordeth delegate, who had praised humanity's engineering. She looked at the High Arbiter himself, an ancient being named Thesson, who had ruled this council for 3,000 years. "We ask for justice," she said. "We ask the council to condemn this act and hold the Vorath accountable." Silence filled the chamber. Catherine watched as species exchanged glances. She saw fear in their eyes, fear of the Vorath, fear of what might happen if they spoke against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. One by one, they voted. The Sindari abstained. The Mordeth abstained. Species after species refused to act. When the count was finished, not a single vote had been cast in humanity's favor. High Arbiter Thesson spread his ancient hands. "The council finds insufficient evidence of wrongdoing. The matter is closed." Catherine stood frozen. She thought of the little girl who had given her a flower. She thought of 2 million graves that would never be dug because there were no bodies left to bury. She thought of Peter, dying in the medical bay of Daniel's ship, asking why. Slowly she reached up and removed her diplomatic credentials. She placed them on the podium before her. The chamber was silent. "You have made your choice," Catherine said quietly. Her voice did not shake. Her eyes were dry. Something inside her had turned to stone. "Now humanity will make ours." She turned and walked out of the chamber. Behind her, some delegates whispered to each other. The soft little apes had learned their place. They had no idea what they had just created. 5 years passed. The galaxy forgot about humanity. At council meetings, the Vorath sometimes joked about the weeping apes who had run home to cry. Other species laughed along, grateful that the Vorath's attention was not on them. Humanity had closed its borders. No ships came out. No messages were sent. Most species assumed they were dying slowly, broken by grief and shame. They could not have been more wrong. On Europa, one of Jupiter's frozen moons, Dr. Samuel Griffin stood before a weapon that should not exist. It was called the Quantum Disruption Missile, and his team had built it from stolen Vorath technology and human ingenuity. Where Vorath weapons punched holes in enemy ships, this weapon would tear them apart at the molecular level. 1 missile could destroy a battleship. 10 could crack a moon. "Run the final test," Samuel said. His assistant pressed a button. Somewhere in the testing range, a captured Vorath cruiser vanished. It did not explode. It simply stopped existing. Samuel nodded slowly. "Good. Build me 1,000 more." Across Earth and its colonies, humanity had transformed. Every factory worked day and night. Every scientist focused on a single goal. Every credit in every bank account flowed toward one purpose: revenge. Director Nathan Cole oversaw it all. He was not a military man. He had been an accountant before New Haven, a quiet person who liked numbers and order. Now he commanded the largest secret operation in human history. He called it Project Reckoning. Nathan's office was filled with screens showing progress reports, shipyards hidden inside asteroids, training facilities buried beneath dead moons, weapons research stations scattered across a dozen worlds. The galaxy saw nothing because humanity had become invisible. Colonel Patricia Lane handled intelligence. She was a small woman with gray eyes and no patience for failure. In 5 years, she had built a spy network that reached into every corner of Vorath's space. She knew their fleet movements. She knew their supply lines. She knew the names of their admirals and the schedules of their patrols. "The Vorath think they're untouchable," she told Nathan one evening. "They haven't fought a real war in 300 years. They've forgotten what it feels like to be afraid." "Then we'll remind them," Nathan said. The human population had changed too. The survivors of New Haven had scattered across Earth's colonies, carrying their grief and their rage with them. Every city had memorial walls now, covered with photographs of the dead. Children grew up seeing those faces every day. They grew up hearing the stories. They grew up asking when humanity would strike back. Admiral Grace Holloway was building the fleet that would answer that question. She had been a young captain during the massacre, commanding a patrol ship too far away to help. That helplessness had burned inside her for 5 years. Now she commanded 4,000 warships hidden in the darkness of the Kuiper Belt. Each ship was named after a victim of New Haven. The carrier, Remembrance. The battleship, Margaret Cole, named after a schoolteacher who had died shielding her students. The destroyer, Little Sarah, named after a girl who had been 6 years old. Grace walked through the flagship's corridors and touched the names engraved on every wall. 2 million names. 2 million reasons to fight. "Admiral," her aide said, "the final construction report is in." Grace took the tablet and read it carefully. Every ship was complete. Every weapon was loaded. Every crew was trained. 5 years of work, and humanity was ready. "Send word to Director Cole," she said. "Project Reckoning is complete." On Earth, the message arrived at midnight. Nathan Cole stood at his window, looking out at a world that had no idea what was coming. In a few weeks, humanity would reveal itself. In a few weeks, the galaxy would learn that the weeping apes had been building something terrible. He thought about the Council, those cowards who had turned their backs on justice, those fools who had let the Vorath laugh at human suffering. They would learn soon enough that their indifference had consequences. Nathan picked up his communicator and called a meeting of humanity's leadership. Within an hour, President Marcus Webb, Ambassador Catherine Moore, Admiral Holloway, and Colonel Lane gathered in a secure room beneath the Swiss Alps. Catherine looked older than she had 5 years ago. Her hair had gone gray, but her eyes were steady, and when she spoke, her voice was calm. "The Council still believes we're broken," she said. "Our silence has convinced them that we accepted defeat. Good. Let them believe that until the moment our ships appear in Vorath space." "We've mapped every Vorath installation," Patricia said, spreading holographic images across the table. 17 major military bases, 42 shipyards, 100 supply depots, and their homeworld, Kethros Prime. "The Eclipse Protocol is ready," Grace added. "We can hit all 17 bases simultaneously. They won't know what's happening until it's over." President Webb was a heavy man with a kind face. Before New Haven, he had been famous for his diplomacy, his gentle nature, his belief in peace. Now he looked at the attack plans with cold eyes. "Do it," he said. "Show them what happens when you murder our children and laugh about it." That night, 4,000 human warships began to move. They slipped through space like ghosts, using jamming technology that made them invisible to every sensor the Vorath had. They spread out across Vorath territory, taking positions, waiting for the signal. Admiral Holloway stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Remembrance. Around her, officers worked in tense silence. Somewhere out there, the Vorath were sleeping peacefully, dreaming of their empire, confident that no one would ever challenge their power. Grace thought about New Haven. She thought about the little colony that had never hurt anyone, burned to ash because it had something the Vorath wanted. She thought about 2 million people who had trusted humanity to protect them. "We're in position," her tactical officer reported. Grace looked at the main screen. 17 targets highlighted across Vorath space. 17 bases that protected the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Not for much longer. "All ships," she said quietly. "This is Admiral Holloway. It has been 5 years since New Haven. 5 years since the galaxy turned its back on us. 5 years of building, planning, and waiting." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 2 million souls. "The waiting is over. Execute Eclipse Protocol." Across Vorath space, 4,000 human warships opened fire. High Commander Zeltrix was eating his evening meal when the first explosion shook his palace. He had been thinking about the upcoming council meeting, where he would propose expanding Vorath territory into the Sindari sector. The soft silver people would protest, of course, but they would do nothing. No one ever did anything. Then his windows turned white with fire. "What is happening?" he roared, storming toward the command center. Officers were running through corridors. Alarms screamed from every wall. Screens flickered with static and confusion. "Commander," a young officer stammered, "we're under attack. All border stations are reporting enemy contacts." The Sindari? The Mordeth? Neither of those weaklings had the courage to challenge the Vorath, but who else would dare? "No, Commander." The officer's scales had gone pale with fear. "It's the humans." Zeltrix laughed. He actually laughed. The weeping apes, the broken primitives, who had crawled back to their little planet 5 years ago. This had to be a joke. Then the tactical display came online, and he stopped laughing. Human warships were everywhere. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. They had appeared at every major Vorath installation simultaneously, like ghosts materializing from the void. Stations that had stood for centuries were already burning. Fleets that had conquered 100 worlds were being torn apart. "How is this possible?" Zeltrix whispered. "Where did they come from?" No one had an answer. Captain Marcus Webb commanded the assault carrier Remembrance. He had lost his younger sister on New Haven. She had been a botanist, studying the alien plants of their new world. She had sent him a message the day before the attack, excited about a flower she had discovered. The Vorath burned it, along with everything else. Now Marcus watched Vorath ships explode on his tactical screen, and he felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Target the shipyards next," he ordered. "I want every facility that builds Vorath warships reduced to scrap." His fleet moved with perfect coordination. Human ships worked together like a single organism, each captain knowing exactly where to be and what to do. They had trained for this moment for 5 years. Every simulation, every drill, every sleepless night had led here. The Vorath fought back, but they were confused and scattered. Their communications were jammed. Their commanders could not reach each other. Ships that tried to regroup found human squadrons waiting to ambush them. It was not a battle. It was a massacre. Admiral Grace Holloway watched the overall picture from her flagship. 17 installations were under attack. The Vorath Border Defense Network, built over thousands of years, was collapsing in hours. "Send the message," she told her communications officer. Across every Vorath frequency, across every channel they used to coordinate their empire, her voice echoed. "This is Admiral Grace Holloway of the human fleet. You killed our children. You burned our colony. You laughed while we buried them. We have not forgotten a single name." She paused, letting the words sink in. New Haven had 2 million people. Today we speak for all of them. There will be no mercy. There will be no negotiation. There will only be justice. On Kethros Prime, Zeltrix tried to organize a counterattack. He screamed orders at his subordinates. He demanded reinforcements from distant sectors, but every route was blocked. Every fleet that moved toward the fighting ran into human ambushes. The apes had not just attacked, they had planned. They had studied Vorath's strategy for years and designed a response to everything. "How do they know our patrol schedules?" Zeltrix demanded. "How do they know where our supply depots are?" The answer was Patricia Lane's spy network, but Zeltrix would never learn that. He would never learn a lot of things. Captain Webb's fleet reached the primary Vorath weapons research station. It was a massive facility, orbiting a gas giant, protected by 100 defensive platforms. The Vorath had built their most terrible weapons here. Ships that could crack planets, viruses that could end species, bombs that could poison stars. "They used this place to design the weapons that killed New Haven," Marcus said quietly. "Destroy the defenses. I want boarding parties ready in 10 minutes." The assault was brutal but brief. Human Marines fought through corridors filled with Vorath defenders. They were outnumbered, but not outmatched. Human soldiers fought with a fury the Vorath had never encountered. These were not conscripts fighting for pay. These were survivors fighting for justice. When it was over, Marcus walked through the captured station. He found the central database and downloaded everything. Decades of Vorath military secrets, weapons designs, fleet compositions, strategic plans. All of it now belonged to humanity. "Commander," one of his officers reported, "we've secured the prisoner block. There are scientists here, Vorath researchers who designed the orbital bombardment systems." Marcus thought about his sister. He thought about the flowers she had wanted to show him. "Put them in cells," he said. "They'll answer for what they built." Across the galaxy, other species watched in shock. The Sindari had long-range sensors that tracked the fighting. The Mordeth intercepted human communications and listened to battle reports. Even the ancient High Arbiter Thesson received updates at the Council Station. No one could believe what they were seeing. The Vorath had dominated this galaxy for 10,000 years. They had crushed rebellions. They had conquered empires. They had never, in all their history, faced anything like this. The humans were not just winning, they were humiliating the most feared military power in existence. Zeltrix sent a desperate message to the Council. It was the first time a Vorath commander had ever asked anyone for help. "They're everywhere. Send reinforcements. Send anyone. Please." The Council received his message in stunned silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then High Arbiter Thesson spoke, his ancient voice trembling. "What have we done? What have we allowed to happen?" No one had an answer. By the end of the first day, humanity had destroyed over 1,000 Vorath warships. They had captured or demolished 42 shipyards. They had seized control of every supply line feeding the Vorath border fleets. The greatest military empire the galaxy had ever known was coming apart at the seams. Admiral Holloway received reports from every front. Her captains were exceeding expectations. Casualties were light. Morale was high. 5 years of preparation had created the perfect weapon, and now that weapon was doing exactly what it had been designed to do. "Admiral," her aide said, "we've established a blockade around Kethros Prime. The Vorath homeworld is cut off." Grace nodded slowly. She thought about Catherine Moore, standing before the Council, begging for justice, receiving nothing but indifference. She thought about the Vorath representative, calling humans weak and primitive. "Let them sit there," she said. "Let them watch their empire burn, and wonder if we're coming for them next." In the darkness of space, human ships continued their work. They moved from target to target, methodical and relentless. They did not pillage. They did not torture. They simply destroyed everything the Vorath needed to make war. And somewhere on his homeworld, High Commander Zeltrix finally understood what humanity had become. Not weeping apes, not broken primitives. Something much, much worse. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. 300 species sat in their seats, watching the main display with expressions ranging from shock to terror. The display showed the remains of the Vorath military, burning shipyards, shattered fleets, an empire brought to its knees in less than 3 weeks. High Arbiter Thesson sat on his ancient throne and felt something he had not experienced in 3,000 years: fear. The doors to the chamber opened. Every eye turned toward the entrance. Ambassador Catherine Moore walked in, but she was not the same woman who had left 5 years ago. Her hair was silver now, her face was hard. She wore no diplomatic robes, only a simple uniform with Earth's flag on her shoulder. Behind her came a holographic display showing humanity's fleet, 4,000 warships, arranged in perfect formation around the Vorath homeworld. The message was clear without words. "Ambassador Moore," Thesson said carefully, "we welcome your return to the Council." Catherine did not smile. She did not acknowledge the greeting. She walked to the central podium, the same place where she had begged for help 5 years ago, and she began to speak. 23 days ago, the human fleet entered Vorath space. In that time, we have destroyed 2,300 Vorath warships. We have captured or demolished 47 military installations. We have seized their weapons research facilities and their strategic reserves. Their homeworld is blockaded. Their military is broken. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. We did this alone. We did this without help from any species in this chamber. We did this after every single one of you refused to act when 2 million of our people were murdered. The Sindari representative shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The Mordeth delegate would not meet Catherine's eyes. All around the chamber, species who had ignored humanity's suffering now sat in terrified silence. "I remember standing here 5 years ago," Catherine continued. "I remember presenting evidence of the massacre. I remember watching you vote, one by one, to do nothing. The Sindari abstained. The Mordeth abstained. Every species in this room chose cowardice over justice." She turned slowly, looking at each representative in turn. "I remember High Commander Zeltrix laughing at us. I remember him saying we were too weak to hold what we claimed. I wonder if he is laughing now." A holographic image appeared behind her. It showed Zeltrix in chains, aboard a human ship, his scales dull with defeat. He was not laughing anymore. "We have him," Catherine said simply. "We have thousands of Vorath prisoners. We have everything they used to threaten this galaxy for 10,000 years. Counselor Mirith of the Sindari Collective stood up. She was a tall, silver-skinned woman with gentle features, and she had always treated humans with kindness. Even 5 years ago, when her government had abstained from the vote, she had privately sent her apologies to Catherine. "Ambassador Moore," Mirith said, "what does humanity want?" Catherine looked at her for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her voice was cold. "We want justice. We want the Vorath to pay reparations for every life they took. We want them to surrender their council seats. We want them to publicly acknowledge their war crimes before every species in this chamber. And we want every member of this council to understand that humanity will never forget what happened here." The chamber erupted in whispered conversations. Reparations were one thing, but stripping the Vorath of their council seats would reshape galactic politics for centuries. It would end their influence forever. High Arbiter Thesson raised his hand for silence. "Ambassador, the Council cannot simply remove a member species. There are procedures, traditions." "Your procedures allowed 2 million people to be murdered," Catherine interrupted. "Your traditions protected the killers and punished the victims. We are not here to follow your procedures, Arbiter. We are here to tell you what will happen next." She pressed a button, and new images appeared. Human warships positioned near Sindari space, near Mordeth territory, near a dozen other species' homeworlds. "We have no desire for conquest," Catherine said. "We did not build this fleet to become the next Vorath, but we will not tolerate threats. Any species that interferes with our justice will be treated as an enemy of Earth. Any species that offers shelter to Vorath war criminals will face consequences. Is this clear? The chamber was silent. 300 species, some of them thousands of years old, sat before a human ambassador and said nothing. Counselor Mirith spoke again. I believe humanity has earned the right to justice. The Sindari Collective will support your demands. A few other species nodded. The Mordeth, calculating as always, quickly added their support. Within minutes, a majority had formed. Not because they believed in justice, but because they feared human ships appearing in their skies. Catherine watched it happen with cold satisfaction. This was not the victory she had wanted 5 years ago. That victory would have come from compassion, from solidarity, from a galaxy that cared about right and wrong. This victory came from fear. It came from humanity proving that the only thing the galaxy respected was power. But it was victory nonetheless. There is one more thing, Catherine said. Tomorrow, High Commander Zeltrix will be brought before the families of New Haven. Every name of every victim will be read aloud. He will listen to all 2 million names. He will look at photographs of the people he killed. He will understand exactly what he destroyed. And after that, Thesson asked quietly, after that, he will spend the rest of his life in a prison cell, thinking about what he did. We will not execute him. We are not monsters, but he will never see his homeworld again. He will never command a fleet again. He will never be anything but a reminder of what happens when you underestimate humanity. Catherine turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing, Arbiter. 5 years ago, I left my diplomatic credentials on this podium. I was told later that someone threw them away. That was a mistake. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a new badge. It was different from the old one. Instead of the simple Earth symbol, it showed Earth surrounded by stars, with a Latin phrase beneath. We remember. I am taking my seat on this council again, Catherine said. Not because I respect this institution, not because I believe in its values, but because humanity will never again be absent when decisions are made about our future. She walked to the human delegation's seat, empty for 5 years, and sat down. Behind her, the holographic display showed the Vorath homeworld, surrounded by human ships, helpless and defeated. High Arbiter Thesson looked at this human woman, this representative of a species he had dismissed as primitive and weak, and he understood something important. The galaxy had changed. The old powers and old certainties were gone. In their place was something new and frightening. Humanity had announced itself to the universe. Not with diplomacy, not with trade, with fire and fury, and a message that would echo through history. Do not make us your enemy. We remember everything, and we never forgive. 10 years had passed since the war. The galaxy was a different place now. President Laura Bennett stood at the window of her office in Geneva, watching the sun set over the mountains. In a few hours, she would address the entire galaxy on the anniversary of New Haven. 15 years since the massacre. 10 years since humanity had risen up and changed everything. She was not a warrior like Admiral Holloway, or a spy like Patricia Lane. She was a teacher before she entered politics, a woman who believed in education and patience and hope. Some people said she was too soft to lead humanity in this new era. She intended to prove them wrong. Her speech was ready. It would not be a speech about revenge or strength or fear. Those days were over. Humanity had proven what it could do when pushed to the edge. Now it was time to show what humanity could build. On the council station, Ambassador Catherine Moore sat in her seat and watched the preparations for the anniversary broadcast. She had been humanity's voice in the galaxy for 10 years now. Her hair was completely white, and her face was lined with years of difficult negotiations. But her eyes were still sharp, and her mind was still quick. She remembered the woman she had been before New Haven. Optimistic, idealistic, believing that diplomacy and goodwill could solve any problem. That woman was gone, burned away with the colony she had failed to protect. In her place was someone harder, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous. But lately, Catherine had begun to wonder if humanity had become too hard, too dangerous, too quick to reach for threats instead of words. The Vorath were a shadow of their former selves. Their empire had been reduced to a single system, monitored constantly by human satellites. Their military was gone. Their influence was gone. Their pride was gone. They survived only because humanity had chosen to let them survive. Was that justice, or was it cruelty wearing the mask of justice? Catherine did not know anymore. Admiral Marcus Webb commanded the human fleet now. Grace Holloway had retired 2 years ago, passing command to the man who had led the assault on the Vorath research station. Marcus was older now, his hair going gray, his face weathered by years of responsibility. He stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the New Haven, and thought about the anniversary. 15 years since his sister had died. Sometimes he could barely remember her face. That frightened him more than any battle. "Admiral," his aide said, "we're receiving messages from the anniversary ceremony. The President will be speaking soon. Put it on the main screen." Laura Bennett appeared, standing before a crowd of thousands on Earth, and billions watching across the galaxy. She looked calm and confident, a leader who knew exactly what she wanted to say. 15 years ago, she began, humanity suffered the worst tragedy in our history. 2 million of our people were murdered by a species that believed we were too weak to matter. The galaxy watched and did nothing. She paused, and her expression softened. What happened next is known to everyone. We built a fleet, we struck back, we brought the Vorath to their knees, and forced the galaxy to recognize our strength. For 10 years, we have been one of the most powerful species in existence. Other civilizations treat us with respect because they fear what we might do. Another pause. Her voice changed, becoming something warmer. But today, I want to talk about something different. I want to talk about what strength really means. Catherine leaned forward in her seat, curious. Strength is not just the ability to destroy, Laura continued. Any fool with enough weapons can destroy. True strength is the ability to choose what to build. True strength is looking at a galaxy that wronged us and deciding to make it better instead of burning it down. She announced the Bennett Accords, a new alliance of species committed to protecting the weak and preventing tragedies like New Haven from ever happening again. Humanity would lead this alliance, not through threats, but through example. Any species that joined would receive protection. Any species that faced injustice would have advocates. We could have become the next Vorath, Laura said. We had the ships, we had the weapons, we had the rage, but that is not who we are. Humanity does not survive by crushing others. We survive by lifting everyone up. Across the galaxy, species listened to her words. Some were skeptical. They had seen human vengeance and could not forget it. But others were hopeful. They had suffered under Vorath domination for centuries, and now someone was offering them protection. Counselor Mirith of the Sindari was the first to pledge her people to the new alliance. She had believed in humanity before it was safe to do so, and she believed in them still. The Sindari Collective stands with Earth, she declared. We will build this future together. Others followed. Within weeks, dozens of species had joined. Not all of them trusted humanity, but all of them recognized that the galaxy needed leadership, and humanity was offering it. On Earth, a young officer named Christina Hayes visited the New Haven Memorial. It was a massive structure of black stone, carved with 2 million names. Her grandmother's name was among them. Christina had never known her grandmother. She had only known the stories, passed down through a family that had never stopped grieving. She touched the stone and felt the names beneath her fingers. Each one was a person. Each one had lived and loved and dreamed of the future. Each one had been stolen. "I'm in the fleet now, Grandma," she whispered. "I'm serving on Admiral Webb's ship. We protect people. We make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else." The stone was cold under her hand, but Christina felt warmth anyway. This was why humanity had fought. Not just for revenge, not just for justice, but to build something worth protecting. Admiral Webb watched the anniversary ceremony from his bridge. When it ended, he stood in silence for a long moment. His tactical officer approached him carefully. "Admiral, is everything all right?" Somewhere out there, ships from a dozen species were moving through space, protected by human patrols. Somewhere out there, children were growing up on worlds that had never known war. Somewhere out there, a galaxy that had once dismissed humanity was learning to hope again. "Yes," he said quietly. "Everything is all right." A young officer, newly assigned to the bridge, spoke up nervously. "Admiral Webb, do you think the galaxy has really learned its lesson? Do you think there will ever be peace?" Marcus thought about his sister. He thought about the flowers she had wanted to show him. He thought about 15 years of war and grief and transformation. "They know what we're capable of now," he said finally. "They know that humanity remembers. They know that we will protect what we love with everything we have." He turned to face the young officer. "But that's not why there will be peace. There will be peace, because we're choosing to build it instead of waiting for others to give it to us. That's what humanity has always done. We face the darkness, and we light a fire anyway." The camera pulled back, showing the flagship floating among the stars. Around it, ships from a dozen species moved in formation, united under an alliance that had seemed impossible 15 years ago. And far below, on a planet called Earth, humanity looked up at the sky and saw not enemies, but possibilities. They had earned their place among the stars. Now it was time to make that place worth keeping. The galaxy whispered a new proverb, passed from species to species in quiet voices. "Do not mistake human kindness for weakness. They remember everything, but they also choose to hope."